Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Skeleton Crew. My name's Jen Callahan here again, and tonight I have a great guest with me. His name is Josh Miller. He is the CEO of an awesome company called Gradient Health, and I'm going to leave all the important information for him to share instead of me trying to jumble through it, because it's really important, groundbreaking work that he's doing. But I'm looking at all the words I have in front of me, and I said to him, I think I'm just going to leave it up to you to share what your awesome company does.
Thanks for having me, Jen. Yeah, quick background on Gradient Health is, look, we've all kind of seen the buzz around AI in radiology. If you want to build an AI in radiology, let's say something like a mammography AI that can detect breast cancer, to build that AI, you need tens of thousands of examples of what breast cancer looks like to teach that AI. So we're a company that what we do is we deliver those kinds of data sets for folks that are building AI in the space. We're one of a few places in the world you can go to and say, look, I need 100,000 de-identified mammograms to train an AI, right? I'm just using mammography as an example, but we have all kinds of radiology data anonymized that we make available for this kind of research.
All right. So my first question when I was looking through your website was, how do you actually come to have these images, to be able to put into these data sets?
Yeah, so we mainly work with hospital systems around the world, right? What we do is we de-identify the information. So we remove all of the doctor's notes, any kind of patient identifying information, and then we de-identify the imaging itself. So sometimes you'll see like annotations, where the rad tech wrote something in, we'll remove all of those. So that way the data can no longer be connected to the patient. We then pull that data into our system and make it searchable. That means our customers are the AI companies, also the radiology equipment manufacturers, even some pharmaceutical companies that are all in this race to detect disease early.
Okay. So I'm going to go even further back to that. Do you go to healthcare systems? Do you contact them and say, I'm in this business looking for images to be able to help AI developers? Would you be willing to allow me to access your images? We'll make them anonymous. Is that kind of how it goes?
Yeah, and the majority of the systems we work with are either like community hospitals, right, or private radiology clinics. And kind of our philosophy on that is we want to make sure those hospitals are using that money for innovation and free patient care. So that way, any kind of data usage, the value that's created from that goes back to the patient population themselves.
Okay. So you're paying them to be able to access the images?
We do either a grant back to the hospital or a revenue share if that data gets used in research, et cetera.
So another thing while I was on the website looking is that talking about clients being able to have access to diverse images. So obviously certain diseases and medical conditions are more prevalent in certain ethnicities. When you're looking at these different images to set up these data sets, are you looking for a specific ethnicity or an age bracket or even like a gender?
All of the above and more, right? Diversity when it comes to radiology data has like 10 different dimensions. It's not just ethnicity, it's things like BMI, things like the manufacturer. Your AI to only work on Siemens machines, then you can't really expect it to work on a GE machine. Really, we think about diversity, yes, in terms of age, yes, in terms of sex, yes, in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of BMI, slice thickness, age of the machine, the manufacturer, the model, even regional variation. Like a Caucasian patient in a rural town is very different from a Caucasian patient in a metropolitan area. And so you need to have that level of diversity captured as well. That's kind of the challenge in this space is if you build an AI and you train it only on, white guys from New York, you can't expect it to work for every other patient. And so one of the fundamental problems we solve is making sure that all that representative data is put into training that model. So that way the AI can answer questions about everyone equally. And we're not exacerbating unequal healthcare, we're making it more equal.
So what different companies do you have contacting you in terms of being able to access your data sets? Obviously, they're developing AI, but I guess really more like pharmaceutical companies, or maybe they're private companies or are looking to branch into treatment for certain diseases.
I would say the majority of the folks we work with are AI companies that are making a radiology AI, need a bunch of data to train it. And you've got the equipment manufacturers, the GE, Siemens, Philips, those guys, they're all trying to build AI as well, and they need data. You've even got the med device companies, right? The folks that make hardware trying to build radiology AI. You've got the pharmaceutical companies trying to identify, disease early, either to get people on certain treatments and bring some value to the patient, or to even recruit for clinical trials. And then, interestingly enough, universities themselves are a good part of our customer base, right? So if you're a researcher at XYZ University and you're trying to build something as part of a grant, you typically need access to this kind of data. Those are really 5 categories of folks that we work with. But we've seen some really, really cool use cases that when I started this company, I would have never imagined.
Yeah. Do you find that, is it solely more like cancer driven in terms of treatment, pre-treatment, or are there other medical conditions that are kind of as prevalent as cancer?
That's a great question. Like maybe a way to put that is, what are people building these algorithms for?
Right.
I would say it's almost 40% oncology. So a large portion of it is oncology. 40% of it is neurology, right? So finding stroke, hemorrhage, kind of things that are very time sensitive, where you want to find them quickly. And then the kind of tail end 20% is everything from MSK to, like longitudinal analysis, population health, things like that. But really, oncology and neurology are kind of the 2, let's say, largest fields people are doing this research in.
This episode is brought to you by xraytech.org, the RadTech career resource. If you're considering a career in radiology, check out xraytech.org to get honest information on schools, degree options, career paths, and salaries. I've heard that sometimes a stroke doesn't show up on a CAT scan immediately. It's almost like it's a day later. And really what they're relying on to diagnose a stroke at that point is really symptoms. Maybe if there is something minute on the image that is seen on ones that have been taken later, that can be used at the time the patient's coming in to be scanned immediately.
Yeah, and there are certainly patterns that an AI can see. If you're talking about small values of pixels, like the window leveling being a little different on a CAT scan, the AI can pick up on that, right, in the way a human eye can't. And so what we're seeing specifically in that space is not saying, hey, there's a stroke in this case. It's saying, okay, radiologist, you've got 1,000 studies you might be looking at in that day. This looks like it might have a stroke. I'm going to move that to the top of the stack, right? Because that's the most important thing for you to look at. Whereas the guy with a broken toe can maybe afford to wait.
Yeah.
Right? Like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You're doing this as a startup company, but this isn't really your first startup. It seems like, you always have your hands in a pot, and your tagline on your LinkedIn was I like to build things, which I think is great.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I've always been specifically in computer vision, right? So automatic analysis of images. And so my first company, this is going to sound super weird, was in satellite imaging for farms, right? So what we were doing was looking at a satellite image and seeing could you look at 100 acres of corn and find a disease, right, in that field and tell the farmer. That sounds very far from medical imaging.
But it's not. It's kind of,
Yeah, it's the same computer science problem as finding a lung nodule in a CT scan. Everything that I do kind of looks weird, right? It doesn't seem that connected, but it's all got that theme of this kind of part of computer science that I love.
So let's go back then to gradient health, obviously, because that's what we're really here to talk about. Say I'm a company who's coming to you and I have this AI software that I'm trying to develop, and I need to access certain types of, let's say, liver images, because we're looking at liver cancer or liver diseases. We set up and, I get access to that. Obviously, there's a database. Is it a normal, say a Google search where you're just typing in the word liver or different parts of the liver?
Yeah, it's a little bit smarter than that, because you have to ask for certain things, right? You might say I really want liver screening, but I want specifically liver CT scans, and I want the slice thickness to be less than, let's say, 3 millimeters. It tends to be a little bit more numerical and quantitative than you'd imagine a Google search, right? When people are building these algorithms. And so we have this interface where you can log in, type in something like liver screening, right? But then you also configure all these other parameters for the data you want, and it goes into the database, comes back, and then you have your data set. They hold on to those images for a certain amount of time. They use it to essentially teach the AI what different diseases look like. And then at the end of the contract, they remove those images or delete them, right? In some cases, they're doing a regulatory filing. So they're trying to show the FDA, look, I built this algorithm. You should approve it. Here's all my data that shows that it actually works. We actually got a grant from the FDA/NIH to make these kinds of data sets, right, that are for proving your algorithm as a medical device.
For a company like that who's going through this, is it suggested that they have a certain amount of images that they've used to develop the software?
It heavily depends on what you're claiming the AI can do, right?
Okay.
So if you're saying, and it's always thought about in terms of risk, right? So let's talk about the stroke cases, right, that we were talking about before.
Mhm.
If you move a case to the top of that stack and it turns out the person doesn't have a stroke, there's not a lot of consequence to that. Their image was going to get read anyway.
Right.
What is, let's say, a higher bar is you say someone has cancer with an AI and they don't.
Right.
That is extremely negative. And so the FDA will ask for higher and higher bars of proof, depending on what you're claiming you can do. Can you potentially suggest there's a stroke? Not a super high bar. Are you saying someone definitively has cancer? Yeah, that's a very high bar, right? And so that could mean, look, you only need 300 images if you're claiming A, and you might need 10,000 if you're claiming B. Once someone explains to us what they're trying to build, we can generally give them some advice on how much of a data set they need.
But I guess in terms of different types of medical conditions or diseases, obviously, I feel like with like cancer, a lot of times they want to take a biopsy of whatever the area is to give that definite answer, but it might be a body part that really doing a biopsy kind of really isn't an option.
That's a good example. And so you don't want to do one unnecessarily. If it's pretty unlikely someone has cancer, you want to make sure you don't do it. And if it's very possible someone has cancer, you want to make sure you do it. And so we look at things like when you're scoring lung nodules, there's this thing called the lung RAD scale, right? Where you say, oh, it looks like lung RAD's 1, lung RAD's 2, basically increasing up to number 4, where number 4 is like, well, this is probably cancer. AI can get a lot more granular than 1, 2, 3, 4. It can say, this is precisely 67% chance of cancer. It'll never be able to definitively say yes or no, but it can help the physician make decisions in their care of the patient.
Software like this is almost like the amazing race, how you said, like there's so many different companies who are trying to develop software like this that, you're just hearing about it all the time. And it's almost like it's become like common stance.
I mean, I think I agree with that. I would have agreed with that like 2 years ago, right? There
Yeah.
were tons of companies that were coming out that all kind of did the same thing, right? It was all like, oh, I can find your lung nodules, whatever it might be. At this year's RSNA in Chicago, I saw some things that blew my mind, that made me very convinced that the next 2 years are going to be very different from what the past 2 years were. One of the demonstrations is basically the chat GPT of radiology, right? If you've played around with it, had a chest x-ray up there, right? And a box where you could type in and you could ask questions. You could say, give me a summary of what's wrong in this chest x-ray. And it would read the chest x-ray and write a few snippets about what was going on. Then I got to ask it and I was like, okay, type in the box. How would I explain this to the patient's partner? And it even gave like a little bit of advice and it was like, you do this. And then the guy at the booth, it was this company called Hopper, Hoppr, said, do you know any other languages? And so I started talking to it in Spanish and it started answering in Spanish, right, for a patient. I think that you're right in saying a lot of the stuff that came out in the last 5 years was kind of par for the course. I think what you're going to see come out in the next 2 years is going to be a fundamental shift from that.
So speaking of the future, I mean, obviously you've done a lot of developing in your company. Could you possibly share where you think Gradient Health currently might be going, or are you working on something particular, or would you rather not share?
No, I mean, I didn't come on the interview to shut up, right? What I see happening a lot is it used to be that the typical AI that people were building in the space, you needed like 1,000 images to build that AI. to build things like what I just described, kind of what's called a foundation model in the space, you need 1 million chest x-rays, which is not simple or easy by any means to come by. That's what I'm pretty excited about for Gradient. It's like, it used to be these one-off data sets from one hospital for 1,000 studies that you'd build these algorithms on, but you end up with these kind of not diverse data sets. They don't come from multiple types of machines, et cetera, and they don't end up at the scale you kind of need to build these. Again, they're called foundation models. That's what I'm most excited about is provisioning those kinds of data sets that will enable those kinds of algorithms.
What's the amount of time that goes into something like that? I guess a foreseeable game plan of when you would like to have something completed by, or how long it would take you.
I mean, we're already doing that stuff today. Right?
Okay.
That's more like I want to do more of it because I kind of see that as the future of development in this space.
What kind of advice do you give to people out there who have, spirit like you?
I think it's just to get started, right? And that sounds real dumb, right? It sounds real simple and it sounds like a major oversimplification. But I think a lot of people wait for a perfect idea that never comes. Whereas every successful business I've ever seen started out as a okay idea. They started doing it, they learned a lot, and it became a great idea. And so the most kind of fundamentally important thing you can do is just get started, right? You don't have to wait for that perfect idea. Do the thing that sounds good enough, and you'll learn enough to turn that into the thing that is the perfect idea.
Well, this was an awesome conversation. Everybody, this is Josh Miller sharing his wonderful company with us, Gradient Health. Can't wait to see what you were saying with the RSNA, with the future of AI that's coming out. And I'm sure that you're a part of helping the development of that. So thank you for taking the time with me tonight. I do really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, make sure you listen in on the Skeleton Crew, past and future episodes. I'm Jen Callahan here with Josh Miller. So we'll see you guys later.
You've been watching The Skeleton Crew, brought to you by xraytech.org. On the next episode, join us to explore the present and the future of the rad tech career in the field of radiology.